Welcome to Mrs. Feighery's Honors U.S. History 2, video number 3 for Chapter 27, Empire and Expansion. The Anti-Imperialist League formed, firmly opposed to this new imperialism of America. Members included Mark Twain, William James, Samuel Gompers, and Andrew Carnegie. Others argued that the Filipinos wanted freedom and that denying it to them was un-American. However, expansionists cried that the Philippines could become another Hong Kong. In the Senate, the treaty was almost not passed, but finally, William Jennings Bryan argued for its passage, saying that the sooner the treaty was passed, the sooner the U.S. could get rid of the Philippines. The treaty passed by only one vote. The Foraker Act of 1900 gave Puerto Ricans a limited degree of popular government, and in 1917, Congress granted Puerto Ricans full American citizenship. U.S. help also transformed Puerto Rico and worked wonders in sanitation, transportation, beauty, and education on the island. In the insular cases, the Supreme Court barely ruled that the Constitution did not have full authority on how to deal with the islands of Cuba and Puerto Rico, essentially letting Congress do whatever it wanted with them. Basically, the cases said that the island residents do not necessarily share the same rights as Americans. America could not improve Cuba that much, however, other than getting rid of yellow fever with the help of General Leonard Wood and Dr. Walter Reed. In 1902, the U.S. did walk away from Cuba, but it also encouraged Cuba to write and pass the Platt Amendment, which became their constitution. The amendment said that the U.S. could intervene and restore order in case of anarchy, that the U.S. could trade freely with Cuba, and that the U.S. could get 2 bays for naval bases, notably one is Guantanamo Bay. The Spanish-American War lasted only 113 days and affirmed America's presence as a world power. However, America's actions after the war made its German rival jealous and its Latin American neighbors very suspicious. There was a division between the U.S. North and South, which had been formed in the Civil War. General Joseph Wheeler was given a command in Cuba. The Filipinos had assumed that they would receive freedom after the Spanish-American War, but when they didn't, they revolted against the United States. The insurrection began on February 4, 1899, and was led by Emilio Aguinaldo, who took his troops into guerrilla warfare after open combat proved to be useless. Stories of atrocities abounded, but finally the rebellion was broken in 1901 when U.S. soldiers invaded Aguinaldo's headquarters and captured him. President McKinley formed a Philippine Commission in 1899 to deal with the Filipinos, and in its second year, the organization was headed by William Howard Taft, who developed a strong attachment for the Filipinos, calling them his little brown brothers. The Americans tried to assimilate the Filipinos, but the islanders resisted. They finally got their independence on July 4, 1946. Following its defeat by Japan in 1894 to 1895, China had been carved into spheres of influence by European powers. Americans were alarmed as churches worried about their missionary strongholds, while businesses feared they would not be able to export their products to China. Secretary of State John Hay dispatched his famous open door note, which urged the European nations to keep fair competition open to all nations willing and wanting to participate. This became known as the open door policy. All the powers already holding spots of China were squeamish, and only Italy, which had no sphere of influence of its own, accepted unconditionally. Russia didn't accept it at all, but the others did on certain conditions, and thus China was saved from being carved up. In 1900, a super-patriotic group known as the Boxers started the Boxer Rebellion, where they revolted and took over the capital of China and Beijing, taking all foreigners hostage, including diplomats. After a multinational force broke the rebellion, the powers made China pay $333 million for damages, of which the United States eventually received $18 million. Fearing that the European powers would carve China up for good now, John Hay officially asks that China not be cut into pieces. Just like 4 years before, it was McKinley sitting on his front porch and William Jennings Bryan actively and personally campaigning, but Theodore Roosevelt's active campaigning took a lot of the momentum away from William Jennings Bryan. Bryan's supporters concentrated on imperialism. Americans were tired of hearing about imperialism, while McKinley's supporters claimed that Bryanism, not imperialism, was the problem. They felt that if Bryan became president, he would shake up the prosperity that was in America at the time, so McKinley wins the election of 1900 easily. This is the works cited page for this video. All images used are from the public domain.